Christianity faces a big problem in explaining the way things are in the world. On one hand, we believe that God is a good and loving God who cares about us and wants the best for us. We believe that this good and loving God created the world, and yet the world is full of bad things. We live in a world where people suffer, where young children are stricken with disease and die horrible deaths, where young people are tragically killed in accidents, where many people suffer horribly in many, many ways through life. We live in a world where tornadoes and earthquakes and floods and other natural disasters create havoc and heartache for many people. We live in a world where some people have good lives and everything seems to fall in place to them, while for other people nothing ever seems to go their way no matter how hard they try. We live in a world where people are murdered, where mass killings occur, and where people are tortured and treated horribly by governments. Now, Christianity has traditionally said that all this is due to what it calls evil, that those things happen because there is evil in the world. And you have to understand that there is evil in the world not just because of people doing bad things like killing people. There's also evil in the world in the sense of tornadoes and hurricanes and stuff like that. Natural evil, just built into the way things work. So evil is not just confined to the bad things people do. It encompasses the things and the way things are that harms people. The question is, why is there evil in this world and where did it come from? In theology, this question has a name. It's called the problem of evil. And notice it's not the question of evil, it's the problem of evil. And the reason it's called the problem of evil is that every time we try to answer those questions, we run into a brick wall with one Christian belief or another. And that makes answering those questions very difficult. The Bible does not directly address this question of the problem of evil, and because of that, people have speculated about it, and different people have pulled different verses out of the Bible and said, okay, this is the answer. So you can imagine that I'm going to pull out a few verses that I like, you're going to pull out a few verses that you like, and we're going to come up with different answers. So today I thought it might be interesting to look at some of the answers people have come up with. Many Christians believe God purposefully created things this way. In other words, that means that God purposely created evil in the world. And I guess that really makes sense in one way. If you believe God created everything, then everything is everything. So God must have created evil then. But then the question becomes, why? Why would God have created a world with evil in it? Now, one idea comes from Calvinism, which at one time was the most pervading influence in American Christianity. And according to Calvinism, God is concerned with one thing and one thing only. God cares about one thing. He cares about making himself look good. That's all God cares about. He cares about making himself look good. And so God has decided that the way he can make himself look good is to showcase his justice and mercy. And so God created the world the way it is, and then he made people sin. And so after he makes people sin, he sends some of them to hell, because after all they sin, he gives them their just deserts. He has showcased his justice, and some God pardons and sends to heaven, and he has showcased his mercy. So by showcasing his justice and mercy, God brings glory to himself. And as people thought more about that, they realized how ridiculous that was. So they developed another idea. And this idea said that God created things the way they are with evil in the world so that we would have a choice whether to follow him or not. If there was only good, then we would follow God simply because that was our only option. But God wanted us to follow him because we want to. So he created evil in the world so we would have the choice. I guess it's sort of like your husband or wife. I mean, I'm sure that all of us would like our husband or wife to stay with us because they love us and want to be there, not because they have no other choice. And so that was the idea that God wanted to give us the choice. Now, both of these ideas that we've talked about have problems. The main one is that the Bible doesn't clearly teach either one of those. And because of that, more ideas have been proposed. Now, one idea that has had some popularity with Christianity is the idea that God did not create evil, but evil came about when a certain angel rebelled against God. And then this idea, the devil or Satan was at one time an angel up in heaven called Lucifer. And Lucifer decided to rebel against God, and because of that, he was thrown out of heaven and thrown down to the earth, where he got mad as the devil, so to speak, and he started going around tempting people. And that's where evil came about. Now, this idea also has problems, the main one again being that the Bible does not clearly teach that. To get that idea, you have to do some creative interpretation with 2 or 3 verses in the Bible that could very well be interpreted a number of other ways. And this also raises some troubling questions. How do we know that at some point in the future a bunch of other angels won't rebel? What if you're up there in heaven 1,000 years from now? You're up there with all your family and all, everything's going great, and you think, well, I'm going to have eternal life in heaven. And all of a sudden, all these angels rebel against God. How do you know that won't happen again? So yet another explanation has been offered. Some Christians say that there is no actual evil power in the world, that evil is just what people do. And that's what the majority of mainline Christians today believe. Because remember, the majority of mainline Christians accept science as the authority, and science tells us there is no spiritual realm. So if there is no spiritual realm, then there can't be evil powers in the universe. So the only evil is that just people just decide to do that. You can choose to go in that convenience store and knock the clerk over the head and get $50 out of the cash register. That's where evil comes in. So there is no real force of evil. It's just people do that. There's major problems with that, though. It may explain why somebody robs a convenience store, but it does not explain what we call the natural evils in the world, like tornadoes, earthquakes, mudslides, and stuff like that. Disease, accidents. It doesn't explain that. So, it also runs up against a problem that the previous one ran up against. Why does God allow people to do these things? After all, if the source of evil is just somebody deciding to do something, could God not have stopped them? Why does God allow somebody to molest a 4-year-old child? Why does God allow someone to beat an 80-year-old woman to death? Why doesn't he stop it? Now we see why this was called the problem of evil instead of the question, because we've gone at it in different directions and run into some real problems. You see, when we look at this, we run into 2 big problems. First of all, it's a Christian belief that God created everything, and that seems to tell us that if there is something in the world, God must have intentionally put it here. And then that makes God responsible for evil. It actually makes God the author, the creator of evil. Even if you try to worm out of that and place the blame on Lucifer, or place the blame on people making bad choices, you still run into a brick wall of the belief that God is almighty and can do anything he wants to, And so why does God just not put a stop to it? You're backed into a corner here. It seems like you either have to say that God is the author of evil, or you have to say that God just turns his head away and doesn't look and allows it to happen. There seems to be no real solution to this. And that's why some Christians have come up with yet another idea. Some Christians believe that there is no evil, that everything is good, that every action is good, that everything that happens is good. It's just that some things seem evil to us because of our limited human perspective and understanding. It's not that there are any bad or evil things out there. It's just that when we interpret things with our limited human perception and understanding, some of the things seem evil to us, but they're really not. They seem evil, but they're not. This idea leans heavily on a passage from 1 Timothy that says, "For everything God created is good." And so the reasoning goes that if God created it, it can't be bad. So the reasoning goes that there are only things that seem bad to us, but they're really not. If you want to go with that idea, you have to say in some way it's really good when somebody walks into a movie theater and shoots 30 people. You have to say it's good when a child suffers a horrible disease. You have to say it's good when people are tortured to death in foreign prisons. How could you consider them good? Well, you have to if you're wanting to go with the idea that there really is no evil in our world. It's only our perspective. And so, see, we really are backed into a corner. The belief that God created everything and the belief that God is almighty and can do anything he wants to do makes it very difficult to make sense of the problem of evil. And so really what most Christians do, they just choose one of the ones we've talked about and they stick with it and they just don't think about the implications of it. They just accept it, don't think about it, go on with their life. Platitudes are okay when things are going well in your life. But when we're faced with some horrible situation, some really bad personal tragedy, platitudes are inadequate. I've seen people's faith completely fall apart when faced with personal tragedies in their lives because all they had was platitude. And then I've seen other people just struggle and struggle and struggle and struggle because on one hand they knew the platitudes weren't right, but on the other hand they thought that was all they had and they couldn't give them up. So what do we do? What we're really searching for is truth with a capital T. We want to understand something. So let's consider how we think about truth. We have a scientific mindset. And science, of course, makes truth claims. And we need to look at how science makes its truth claims. Well, I guess I should preface this by saying science, of course, recently has changed the way it makes truth claims. So we're going to look at the way it used to make truth claims before it changed. Okay, so what science does is science observes. And it sees what it observes. And then, based on what it observes, it develops a hypothesis. And then it develops some way to test that hypothesis. And if over the course of a number of different independent tests, that hypothesis holds up, then that is considered a fact in science, and then that will be considered a truth claim. So that's how science used to work. Observations, from that they develop a hypothesis, then they test that hypothesis, and then if it holds up, that becomes a fact, and then that becomes truth. And so you see we went through a process. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we came up with truth. But now, if you remember last week, we talked about truth, and we said that according to the New Testament understanding of the word truth, truth is not apparent from the way things appear to be. We saw that truth is actually hidden by appearance. That appearance is not truth. In fact, that appearance distorts truth. And therefore, we cannot approach a question with the scientific method, because remember, the scientific method relies most of all on observation, which is appearance. And we saw that in the New Testament sense, appearance distorts reality. So if we try to use that 1, 2, 3, 4 method, we'll end up with a distortion of reality. The Apostle Paul said that we today see through a mirror darkly. We are limited in both our vision and in our understanding. So I want to approach this problem of evil differently. We're going to approach it with the mindset that we talked about last week. The mindset of standing out on the beach at night in the dark and looking out over the ocean and wondering what wondrous things might lie on the other side of that ocean. And we're going to approach it with the realization, first of all, that there's much more going on than we see. And much more going on than we understand. There is much more going on with things than we know. We do not have to say that God created things to be the way they are today. We do not have to say that God created evil or that God wants it to be here. We do not have to say that God allows evil. We do not have to say that God uses evil to accomplish his purpose. All we have to do is stand on the beach at night and gaze out over that dark water with a sense of awe and mystery. We have no idea what's going to be on that other side. Until we get over there, we never will. But as we stand there and look out over that water, we know there's something wondrous over there. We know there's something better over there than we ever imagined. We just haven't gotten there yet to see it. You see the difference in looking at the world through a scientific lens and looking at the world with the sense of wonder and mystery. We don't have to explain it. We know that one day God's going to put an end to evil. We know that God's going to put an end to the way things are now. We don't know what that will look like. But when we think about it, it's like we're standing there at night looking out over that dark ocean with a sense of awe and wonder and mystery about what kind of exotic worlds might lie on the other side. We don't know what we'll find once we get over there, but we're pretty sure that it's going to be better than we ever thought. You see, if we live our lives thinking we understand it all and thinking we see it all, we lose that sense of awe and wonder and mystery. We've got to live our lives with the thought that there's much more to things than we imagine. I have no doubt that once we get to heaven, we'll be shocked, because we're going to find out that things were actually much different than they seemed when we were here on earth. We'll come face to face with the realization that we never really saw the way things really were when we were here on earth. On earth, we were living in a mirror darkly. And I think that when we get to heaven, we'll see that there's something more wondrous than we ever imagined. Was even more wondrous than we could ever imagine. Maybe it is that when we get to heaven, we will realize all the time that we were on earth, that we always had the power that Jesus talked about when he said that if we were to say to this mountain, be moved and thrown into the sea, and had faith that it would happen, it would happen. You see, maybe when we get to heaven, we realize we've always had the power. Whose interest does it serve to convince us that we do not have that power?